years, the Catholic and Anglican churches have been forced to confront the presence of child abusers in the clergy and to stop blaming the abused for their own violation. Not so the Jehovah's Witnesses. They continue to shelter pedophiles and even protect them by imposing an impossible burden of proof on the children they molest. 3 years ago, Sunday exposed the extent of child abuse within the Jehovah's Witnesses, but the church is still ignoring the problem, still accusing the victims of being the real sinners. Sunday has now uncovered fresh evidence of incest by a church elder and found a convicted pedophile in another congregation who's again able to prey on young people. Graham Davis won an award for his 2002 exposure of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and he now continues his investigation.
They're called the Silent Lambs. Silent because they've kept their stories to themselves for so long. Lambs because as children they were meant to be protected from predators in the Christian flock but weren't.
I was the little sheep that needed help, and I'm one of thousands probably, and they didn't come back to look after me properly.
We've met Simon Thomas before in a Sunday report I did back in 2002 on the child abuse crisis in the Jehovah's Witnesses.
I remember that the first time he actually touched me and did something to me, it was a real life-changing moment.
Simon Thomas was 12 when he fell prey to this man, Robert Souter. Even when Souter admitted his crimes to church elders, he was allowed to continue as a Jehovah's Witness. He also continued to molest other children. Nearly 3 years on, Simon is joined by another of those victims. Only now is John Dingham able to confront his own demons, given alcohol and molested by Robert Souter when he was just 13.
I was that drunk, in fact, that Robert liked to carry me back to the four-wheel drive. That was there that night that I was sexually abused, without being too graphic. So yeah, it's pretty much my first sexual experience and my first ever hangover.
At 13?
Yeah.
But John is just one of the fresh cases we'll meet as we revisit this story and again confront the Jehovah's Witnesses over their handling of child abuse. Sonia Mortimer was 6 years old when a church member by the name of Dennis Evans forced her to have oral sex with him. Confessing all, Evans was suspended from the congregation for just 9 months.
And what do you think about that?
Oh, angry, hurt, devastated.
What is going on in that church?
I've got no idea. I've got no idea.
John? Yes. Hi.
But now Sonia wants answers from the elder responsible, John Wingate.
9 months is quite sufficient for a pedophile, someone that abused me, that made me... 9 months is good enough for that, is it? What if it was your daughter? What if it was your daughter? How would you feel? Would you feel it's devastated? You had an office as far as the congregation was concerned. And as far as I'm concerned, you abused that. 9 months is good enough. God knows what he's doing to other kids.
What have you got to say, John?
Well, what can I say?
What indeed? And God knows what, if anything, Dennis Evans is doing to other kids. Sunday has traced him to the Nanango Yarraman congregation in southeast Queensland.
What would you say to him under the circumstances if he's watching?
But I hope his life is ruined just as much as mine.
Whether or not the congregation here has been told Dennis Evans is a convicted pedophile, we can't establish. But on previous form, probably not. For parents are sometimes kept in the dark, even while their children continue to be molested. We'll call her Lynn. She's a mother whose son was being interfered with. The molester confessed to church leaders she wasn't told.
I mean, how do you feel about the fact that the elders didn't tell you?
They knew that he was coming to my home. They knew what he'd been doing to my child.
And in fact, he says it in this correspondence, doesn't he? I told the elder what I did to Bo. There's proof
Yes,
that they knew,
yes,
and they didn't tell you.
no.
Do you regard that as a betrayal of the trust that you had in them as elder?
Absolutely.
But as well as shielding child molesters among its ordinary members, there's evidence of pedophile activity in the church hierarchy.
An elder in the church having sex with his teenage daughter.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think he feels about it now?
I don't know.
The victim we'll call Julie is still considering whether to go to the police with her allegation that as a teenager she was raped repeatedly by her father, a prominent elder and senior office bearer in the Jehovah's Witnesses in New South Wales. We're obliged to conceal her identity and his until the law takes its course.
So I was told that I had to come home at lunchtime. Mum was never home, my older brother and sister weren't home. So it was just set up that my father could use that as the time to abuse me, I guess.
What happened?
He would get me, I'd have to go into his room, into their room, and this was several times a week.
Several times a week
Several
he was
times
having
a week.
sex with you?
Yes.
How old were you?
Started when I was 13 and ended just as I turned 15.
This is a story of the most shocking betrayal, of hypocrisy, arrogance, and for those affected, untold pain. 3 years ago, there was global outrage over an avalanche of allegations worldwide that the Jehovah's Witnesses were protecting pedophiles and ignoring the plight of their victims. Of course, they weren't alone. Mainstream churches like the Roman Catholics and Anglicans also came under fire for their policies on child abuse. An allegation of cover-up even forcing the resignation of Australia's Governor-General, former Archbishop Peter Hollingworth. But while the mainstream churches were forced to confront their own misdeeds and introduce new protocols to protect children, have the Jehovah's Witnesses changed? On the evidence we'll hear today, not enough.
Do you still insist on at least two reliable witnesses to any act like this?
Yes, we do.
You do.
It's the principle that protects the pedophile. The extraordinary dictate we exposed 3 years ago in the Jehovah's Witnesses rule book. There must be 2 or 3 eyewitnesses, not just persons repeating what they've heard. No action can be taken if there's only one witness. Such an edict would simply not hold in an Australian court of law.
Blind Freddy knows that a child abuser doesn't sit around waiting for 2 or 3 witnesses before doing anything.
That's correct.
How is it that this escapes the elders of the church?
They rely on a biblical text which says that all matters are to be established on the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses.
And 3 years on, passages from Deuteronomy and Matthew are still used to justify the 2-witness rule in edicts from the Australian Church's headquarters, or Bethel, on the southern outskirts of Sydney.
Nothing's changed.
And what do you think about that requirement?
Well, I think it's ridiculous. You tell me anybody that assaults a child that waits until there's a couple of people that can watch them.
In the case of Julie, it was a standard of proof her abusive father, the church elder, used to taunt her.
I got told at the time that there was nothing I could do about it.
In what sense?
Well, I couldn't tell anybody because nobody would believe me.
But while your father was having sex with you,
Yeah.
he was saying, you can't prove this without 2 witnesses.
Yeah, That's right.
He specifically said that?
Yes. Yeah. And then the only other elder in the congregation there was my father's best friend. So I didn't stand a chance. There was nobody I could talk to.
Small wonder that Julie eventually tried to take her own life, and that many silent lambs remain acutely distressed.
We can't change what's happened.
I don't want you to change it. I didn't ask you to change it. Did I ask you to change it?
What would you like me to do?
What would I like you to do? There's one, nothing, because you've done it.
Yeah, you do that well.
You've done it.
I first caught up with John Wingate in September 2002 when I asked him about his handling of the case of Simon Thomas, abused by Robert Souter when he was just 12.
Now, what that family wants to know is why he was reinstated into the church around 6 months later.
Bring and watch our Society of Australia and I will answer all your questions regarding that situation.
Well, can you tell me, sir, why, why can't you speak about it?
Because I'm not at liberty to.
Why?
Because I'm not.
You handled the case.
That's none of your business.
I spoke to an elder down there and he said Robert Souter was repentant, so when you're repentant you're allowed back into the congregation.
It was the police who eventually established that as well as Simon, Robert Souter may have abused more than 40 other minors. But 3 years on, we've new evidence centred on the congregation John Wingate presided over as an elder, Cooma in southern New South Wales.
Just how many pedophiles are on its files, the Australian Church won't say. But if the record in this tiny congregation is any guide, the scale of this scandal is truly frightening. Here in Cooma, we've established that at least 2 pedophiles have preyed on young people in the congregation. Well, today comes the reckoning, as some of the victims speak out for the first time.
I mean, I know this will be a difficult question for you to answer, but what was the nature of the abuse?
Well, I've never told anyone.
Would you prefer not to?
It just hurts too much.
James Kerr is yet another of Robert Souter's victims. He's never told his story to the police or anyone else.
After he said, "Why did you let me do that to you?"
So he was blaming you?
Yeah. He was blaming me for everything.
And have you felt that it was your fault?
My whole life, even now.
But while Robert Souter targeted the boys of the Cooma congregation, the girls fell prey to Dennis Evans. There's Sonia Mortimer, who we've met.
It's had an impact on every aspect of my life. Trusting, having relationships. Yeah, haunts me every day.
And someone who doesn't want her real name used, but is willing to show her face.
He assaulted me sexually assaulted and forced me to perform oral sex, and he did that on 3 occasions.
3 occasions?
Yeah.
How old were you?
13.
As we'll see, both abusers have been dealt with by the law. What's at issue is the church's handling, its critics say mishandling, of these cases. To understand the scope of this tragedy, some understanding is needed of the nature of the organisation whose representatives have knocked on virtually every Australian door.
We need to be zealous as proclaimers of God's kingdom, shining as illuminators of the world. And we encourage...
The Jehovah's Witnesses are officially known as the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and unlike mainstream religious groups, see themselves as the only true faith. In fact, to be a Jehovah's Witness is to be in the truth, to be saved when the rest of us in the world are destroyed by Armageddon, God's day of judgment that's supposedly just around the corner.
We pray, God, that you watch over them.
The Sunday program isn't just the work of Satan. The devil lurks at every turn, in the apocalyptic hyperbole of Viv Maritz, the church's Australian head.
If you decide you want to do some of your own thing, well, you can. But be careful, because this world is deceived. It's deceived by the devil. You should
Set apart from the big bad world, the 60,000 Jehovah's Witnesses in Australia can't celebrate Christmas or birthdays. They can't vote, join the military, or marry outside the church. But what many don't grasp, say the critics, is something more fundamental, the brainwashing, the insidious hold the church has over its followers, and the twisted logic of some of its teachings.
Well, I'm disfellowshipped, which means I've been publicly removed from the congregation.
Adelaide academic Miriam Hughes fell foul of the sect for writing about its disempowerment of women.
With paedophilia and the complicated way in which witnesses think, if a pedophile were to be deemed repentant by the elders in the congregation, he is in line for reinstatement within the congregation, and that also means redemption as far as God is concerned. But for someone like myself, if I were to ask to return to the congregation and to be allowed back into the congregation, I would be refused.
This letter to all elders says, it is possible for a person to stop his or her wrongful course, repent, and thereafter live in harmony with God's righteous standards. This is true of all wrongdoers, even a former child abuser. So all Robert Souter and Dennis Evans had to do was repent, and they were back among the children. The routine recidivism and cunning of pedophiles ignored, more victims, more abuse.
What was your reaction?
Let's look at what happened when James Kerr went to the Cooma elders after Robert Souter had confessed to having sex with him.
First of all, one of them said to me, "Why didn't you come and confess your sins earlier?"
Confess your sins?
Yeah, my sins. And I was dumbfounded by that straight away. I was told that what had happened between me and Robert Souter was a homosexual act, and that I was basically a homosexual, and I'm no better than any other homosexual out there.
Who said that to you?
John Wingate.
Is it true, John, that you said to James that he was a homosexual?
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
He has a different version of what I had said at that meeting with himself and two other elders.
I had committed a homosexual act, and I was the same as them. And we know what God will do to homosexuals.
What's that?
Well, they'll be destroyed at Armageddon.
Did you say that?
I said to him, in front of the other members, that what had taken place between those individuals was a homosexual act.
It wasn't a homosexual act, though, John. It was child abuse. It was abuse. And James wasn't the first that Robert Souter abused.
We were not aware of it at that time.
What sort of impact has it had on your life?
Sick of being depressed all the time. Sick of being feeling suicidal all the time. Sick of thinking that nothing cares. No. I don't care what happens to me. I couldn't give a rat's ass.
Have they ever offered you, the church, any counselling whatsoever?
No. Well, as far as I'm concerned, it was my fault. I hate him for that.
And then there's the abuse of Sonia Mortimer by the resident pedophile who preferred girls, Dennis Evans. It took Sonia 24 years to speak out about what had happened to her as a 6-year-old.
Now, you told somebody you were living with, didn't you, about what had happened. They then went to the church elder, didn't they?
Yeah.
What was his name?
John Wingate.
What happened to Dennis?
He was disfellowshipped in this congregation.
For how long?
For 9 months.
For 9 months.
For 9 months.
At that time, they said they were quite happy with the disfellowshipping.
Is this true? Is this true? After 9 months?
After 9 months.
He was back in the congregation?
Yep.
How do you feel about that?
Angry. Very hurt, because something so pure, someone so evil can be in that organisation.
This was a confession from a pedophile.
That's right.
Right, he confessed to it.
Yes.
To abusing a 6-year-old.
Yes.
And you disfellowshipped him, you banned him from the congregation for 9 months.
Yes.
And that was fair enough?
Well, at the time we acted with the information that we had.
The information you had was a confession that I have abused this 6-year-old.
His conduct, that it was a one-off thing. Once again, we're doing...
A one-off thing? A one-off thing with a 6-year-old?
Let me qualify.
That's okay, is it?
No, let me qualify remarks. There is no evidence of sexual abuse of other children by this guy. Okay.
As we'll see, no evidence yet. That was to come. And, well, Dennis Evans was repentant.
In a situation like that, you look for a person's remorse and all of these qualities that go along with a request to be able to be allowed back into the Christian congregation.
But every pedophile is remorseful when he gets caught. That's the problem with pedophilia.
Well, it's all right for you to stand there and tell me all the facts.
But we know that he molested. We know he molested more girls than just Sonia.
We do now, don't we?
We do.
Yes, we do now.
Yeah.
Yes, so Dennis Evans was also abusing this girl when she was just 13.
I told my father and my mother what had happened, and then my mother went to the congregation and asked the brothers what they were going to do about it. Then we had a meeting and he admitted what he'd done, and they just said not to talk about it to anybody and that they would deal with it.
And did they deal with it?
And no, they hadn't dealt with it.
It was only when Marie and Sonia discovered years later they'd both been molested that they finally decided to go to the police. Evans confessed all, was tried and convicted, but because he's partially blind, escaped a jail sentence.
You said I could take it through the society or I could take it through the legal system. And what did I do? I had to take it through the legal system. I had to tell strangers, people, what had happened to me. And you think that made me feel? How do you think that made me feel?
John, what are you going to do? What's the church going to do to help these people now? Because they're clearly in a state of trauma. Well, what are you going to do about this, mate?
Well, we will try. It's up to those individuals. If they wish us to help them in some way, we're quite happy to do that.
You've offered spiritual help. In other words, Bible readings. What they need is counselling.
Well, if they choose to employ professional counsellors to help them cope with their distress and their abuse,
they can send you the bill?
No, that is their choice.
As we've heard, Dennis Evans now attends this Kingdom Hall in the small Queensland town of Yarraman.
Do you worry about the safety of the children in that congregation?
Yes, I do, and not only because he's there, if they let him in there, who else is there as well?
Who else indeed? A two-witness standard of proof, derisory punishment, routine forgiveness for acts of contrition. The Jehovah's Witnesses are truly a magnet for pedophiles.
God is supposed to be someone of love. How is any of that love?
Wolves who prey on the lambs harboured and forgiven. Lambs silenced, shunned and abandoned.
And can you explain to me why they would favour a pedophile over somebody like yourself?
No, I can't, because I don't know. It's like I'm the one that's done the wrong.
Is that how they've made you feel?
Yeah. I'm a victim, I'm not the perpetrator.
And do you think you did anything wrong?
No, I just trusted.
So the lambs are sacrificed for the continuing good name of the sect. Those who go public, pilloried, like the two who appeared in our last story 3 years ago. Natalie Webb's father, Victor, was sent to jail for 10 years for having sex with her from the age of 4 until she was 17. Yet incredibly, some Jehovah's Witnesses directed their venom at her.
I was a liar, basically, and that God's organisation wouldn't allow that to happen.
And while Robert Souter eventually received a 3-year jail sentence for abusing Simon Thomas and John Dingham, it wasn't the pedophile who was denounced by the circuit overseer, but the victims.
Basically a lot of lies that were told on the show, and the people on the show were bordering on apostate, being apostate.
You?
Yes, me.
An apostate meaning?
A person who speaks out against God and the Holy Spirit.
We asked the self-appointed custodian of the truth, the Watchtower Society, to take part in our story and received this response, which included, "We make a strenuous effort to protect people from persons known to be guilty of sexual abuse." But tell that to the mother whose son continued to be abused while church elders knew all along and didn't tell her. When the crime was finally exposed came the ultimate indignity that convinced the family to leave the church for good.
Even though there was a restraining order, even though he'd confessed to the police and he was waiting to go to court, he still came and sat right in front of us in the Kingdom Hall. And my son was just so traumatised by it, we had to leave straight away.
As we've seen, the sect is now facing a fresh crisis over this woman's rape allegation against her father, the prominent elder.
Given your father's senior position in the church, do you expect the rest of the hierarchy to believe you?
No.
You don't?
No. My father is very well known within the church.
He has committed a crime against you. Don't you think you should go to the police?
Possibly should. But I don't know if I could. When all is said and done, it's still my dad. Yes, it's destroyed me and I'll never get rid of that. But I don't know if I want to destroy the rest of my family.
But as this victim wrestles with her appalling dilemma, those who did go public 3 years ago seem to have found a certain peace that's always eluded them. When we last met Simon Thomas, he showed us his paintings, tortured images of the pain he'd endured.
Are you still painting those kind of images?
No, I don't. I don't paint like that anymore. That was a stage that helped me purge the feelings I had, and now I'm past that.
You felt empowered by showing your face?
Yes, I did. I did.
And Natalie Webb, the girl abused by her father. This was her 3 years ago.
My earliest memory is having a bath with my father, and he was touching me, and from other things around me I realised that I would have been about 4.
And this is Natalie today.
You look a lot happier.
I am, thank you.
Was it beneficial talking to us, do you think?
Very beneficial, yeah.
In what sense?
I think it validated a lot of what I felt, but it also made me feel like I wasn't the only person who had been through it, and I wasn't abnormal or demonic or any of those things.
Those we've met today have helped lift the veil higher on the darkest secrets of the Jehovah's Witnesses. But their journey towards closure is just beginning.
All right, you can't stop people from coming into these organisations. It's good and bad and everywhere, but at least put something in place to try and make them think twice.
God is a God of love. How can a God of love allow anything like this to happen in his so-called organisation here on earth?
I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just telling people what happened. But putting it out there so other people don't get caught up in the same situation.
Lifting the veil on the Jehovah's Witnesses, that report by Graham Davis, the producer Kirstine Lum. And in our cover story next week, we know that smoking isn't good for